Thank you for joining me. Today I'll be showing you a game analysis of a very good game played in 2018 by Magnus Carlsen versus Nakamura, a very strong opponent, both for Carlsen and obviously Nakamura is a great player as well. The reason that I chose this game, because they've met each other many times, is because Nakamura decides to choose the Sicilian defense, defense that I really like, and I even made a video about it. I will have a little tab right now that you can click if you are not familiar with it. I do suggest you go watch it and learn how to play with it. Anyways, let's get into the game. Magnus starts off with a very strong move of e4. And as a Sicilian goes, c5 is played by Nakamura. Generally, in this position, a good move would be moving to f3 with the knight, which is what he did, obviously trying to get as much positional advantages, hoping to move this d4 pawn upwards. And Nakamura goes through true Sicilian with d6, giving room for this diagonal. The game continues, and like I said, that is the mainstream for the Sicilian, and most opponents take here because you're trading a side pawn for a central pawn, which is very worth it. Also, you're doubling up for a quick second on this pawn, but very quickly it'll get sorted out. So that is what Nakamura does, the smarter choice. And that is a very famous response, obviously targeting this pawn, making the next move, I'm not going to say forced, because there's many moves that you can make, but making the next move relate to this pawn in some way. And Magnus obviously moving his knight, the best way to protect the pawn while still making some advancements. The game continues. It's a very standard use of the Sicilian. Notice here, Magnus decided not to go for this trade. I think that's a very good idea. If he goes for this trade, he opens up this file right here, and a very easy lift for this rook. So he's waiting for Nakamura to initiate the trade. Here, Nakamura pushes his pawn, and Magnus easily takes this. Getting a queen into the game isn't necessarily the best choice, and that is what Nakamura decides to choose. But Magnus delays this choice by first capturing this. Obviously here, the rook is threatened, which is why castling is a great option. Usually with the Sicilian, you don't necessarily want to castle immediately, but here, first of all, it's pretty mid-game, and the rook is threatened. Castle is a great use of a move in this case. It's important when you castle to understand why you're castling. You don't want to castle just to use your move. Mostly, you want to get something out of it. The game continues again. Very obvious moves for both players. Here, notice I talk a lot about these trades because it's very interesting. By moving the knight here, you're allowing for two trades to happen. One with the rooks, another with the bishops. Magnus, he decides to take with the bishop, and it's very interesting how they decide. I think bishop was the right option. If this queen is slightly threatening this this right here, the rook, and so taking with the bishop and leaving a threat is better than trading here and then having these queens face off. Again, very generic. Now here, Nakamura doubles up on these on the d file with these two rooks, which is something that I like to do a lot in my games. I think just doubling up is a great advantage because you have a lot more movement possibilities with rooks. You can easily go there, and you just have a lot more possibilities. And something again I'll point out clearly, Magnus is feeling ahead in the game, even though the game is tied. And usually when you don't initiate trades like Magnus does here by moving his rook, you tell your opponent that you're confident, and usually that comes from an advantage. So usually you'd be winning. Magnus here, the game is right now tied, 2 pawns, 2 bishops, and a knight for both. And again, like I just pointed out, Magnus is telling his opponent that he wants to use all of his tools and advantages. He feels that he can win this game. He's confident that in his abilities, and by again not initiating a trade. I think that's one of the key takeaways from this game. Don't always trade just because it's something you can do. You always want to think about, does it help you or your opponent more? And how does it help you? The queen getting pushed back by the pawn. Here, this queen is a very good placement. It's slightly pinning this knight, because even though, yes, this knight can move and the queen obviously won't take, now you can play something along these lines, right? And then have checkmate. So that's why the king moves, to have some ways out. Tip, by the way, make sure you always have your king having a way out. If the 3 red dots represent pawns, then simple movement like this, checkmate very, very easily if it's clear here. So make sure that you always have at least one entry or exit, I guess, for the king. The game continues, and now that there is a way for the king to escape, the knight is free to move. Now a series of checks happens. Here, the sacrifice, where the knight allowed for the queen to take. I think it's a very interesting move by Magnus. Also check. Check. It's just a series of checks, which is what Magnus does really well. He manages to force, every move in the end game for its opponent. Here, Nakamura forces a trade, and he's noticed that Magnus doesn't like these trades, so he forces a trade. Obviously, the king cannot move if the king had any ideas of moving, because of this knight right here, nicely placed, protecting, well, these 2 squares, making the king be kind of stuck. All 4 actual rooks were traded forcefully, which is very interesting. Now, as you can see here, that was one of the greatest things that's the thing that Magnus does the best. You can see that in this position, almost everyone would agree that Black is doing considerably better. White has a few more pawns, but Black has an extra piece. And end game, knights are very, very valuable. So Magnus, this doesn't threaten him at all. He simply forces a check, and something that was not considered necessarily correctly was that Nakamura should have gone here, because if he goes here, there's no way for Magnus to pin the knight with the king. Any other choice, if he goes here, queen goes here, and that same line happens where the queen can take the knight next move. And Nakamura, I guess, was under time pressure, didn't see this, and Magnus capitalized on that by taking the knight. From here, Magnus is up by 2 pawns, so he loves to trade in this scenario, obviously, like I explained. when you're up in pieces, you want to trade because you want to simplify the board. Here, the game, I mean, it's just a game of who can get a queen quicker. And right here in this position, Nakamura is threatening a very, very quick queen. So instead of focusing on your own queen, Magnus had to think and make sure that he calculated correctly and can stop this queen, which he can. Nakamura plays this last move with the king, but realizes that there's nothing else that he can do, and he resigns after this beautifully placed king. I want to show you some continuations. If Nakamura tried to move his queen here, king goes right under the pawn, and the great thing about a king and a king for Magnus in this scenario is a king cannot go right here to move the pawn, to move the king, which means that this king is staying here forever, or for as long as they want, which means that this pawn is, well, staying here for as long as Magnus wants. And, well, 3 pawns on this side against this 1 pawn, and 2 pawns here against this 1 pawn. You can see who's going to win, and most players would resign in this scenario. So Nakamura didn't even give Magnus the pleasure of checkmating him. This was a very, very interesting game from the start. Nakamura playing the Sicilian, and you can see that it really evened out the game. Even though he did end up losing, I mean, he's playing Magnus Carlsen, right? But you can see that in the mid-game, I mean, up until, let's find it, that knight pin, up until right here, I mean, Nakamura was up by 1 point, and then he miscalculated that and lost the knight. Alright, thank you guys for watching. This was a very interesting game. It shows you how powerful and great the Sicilian can be against an amazing player like Magnus. And it shows you how amazing Magnus really is with overcoming this loss of points. I do want to quickly say, if you guys want to subscribe and you like this analysis, please consider subscribing and liking the photo. The video. If you have any games that you'd like me to analyze, please leave them in the comments below. I'll check every comment. And thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.